The city didn't feel the same anymore. Amara noticed it the moment she slowed to a stop beneath a streetlight, her breath still uneven as she tried to steady it. The sounds of traffic had returned, voices drifting from nearby sidewalks, the distant hum of movement threading through the night like nothing had happened. But something had, and she couldn't shake it. She straightened slowly, pressing a hand against her chest as if that might calm the rhythm of her heartbeat. It didn't. The adrenaline still lingered, sharp and restless beneath her skin. Her phone was still in her hand. She hadn't even realized she'd picked it up again. The screen glowed faintly, Raylan's name still there from the interrupted call. Amara stared at it for a second, her thumb hovering just above the screen before she finally tapped it. It rang once, twice. Then, "Amara, what happened? You just hung up, are you okay?" Raylan's voice came through fast, edged with concern. "I'm fine," Amara said quickly, though the word came out a little tighter than she intended. She forced a breath, trying to even her tone. "I just dropped my phone." There was a pause on the other end. "You don't sound fine." Amara glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the street behind her. Nothing. Just people passing by, cars moving through intersections. Everything normal again. Too normal. "I'm good," she repeated, softer this time. "I just took a wrong turn and ended up somewhere weird." "Weird how?" Amara hesitated. How did she explain that? That she'd been grabbed by someone who didn't feel like a random stranger? That something, not someone something, had moved in a way her brain refused to process? "That kind of weird," Raylan added, picking up on the silence. Amara exhaled slowly, rubbing her temple with her free hand. "Just quiet. Like too quiet." "That's already a red flag," Raylan said. "Where are you?" Amara looked around, taking in the street signs, the storefronts she hadn't paid attention to before. "I'm not far," she said. "I can find my way back." "You want me to come get you?" The offer sat there for a moment. Amara considered it. Really considered it. But something in her resisted the idea. Not because she didn't want help, but because she couldn't explain what had just happened well enough for it to make sense. And saying it out loud might make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. "I'm okay," she said again, more firmly this time. "I'll head back now." Another pause. Then a sigh. "Fine. But text me when you get in." "I will." "And Amara?" "Yeah. Don't take any more shortcuts tonight." Despite everything, a small breath of a laugh slipped out. "Noted." She ended the call and lowered her phone, her grip tightening slightly as the quiet settled back in around her. For a moment she just stood there, listening, waiting. But whatever had been there, whatever she'd felt, was gone. The walk back felt longer than it should have. Amara stayed on the main streets this time, sticking close to the light, to the movement, to the presence of other people. She kept her pace steady, her attention sharper now, her eyes catching every shift in shadow, every figure that lingered just a second too long in her peripheral vision. Nothing happened. No footsteps behind her. No sudden movement. No pressure in the air. And somehow that made it worse. By the time she reached her dorm building, her shoulders ached from the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. She pushed through the front doors, the familiar interior lighting washing over her in a way that should have felt grounding. It didn't. Not completely. She made her way upstairs, her steps quieter now, more deliberate as she reached her room and pushed the door open. The space looked exactly the same as she'd left it. Her bag near the door. The bed slightly unmade. The city lights still glowing faintly through the window. Normal. Unchanged. Amara stepped inside and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a second longer than necessary. Then she moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Her shoes came off first, kicked aside without much thought. Her bag followed, dropped near the chair as she crossed the room. Only then did she stop. Her gaze dropped to her arm, to her wrist, the spot where his hand had grabbed her. A faint discoloration was already forming beneath her skin, subtle but unmistakable. Her fingers hovered over it before she pressed lightly. Pain flared. Real. Not imagined. Amara swallowed, her thoughts shifting again, sharper this time. "That wasn't nothing," she murmured. She turned toward the mirror, catching her reflection in the dim light. Her hair was slightly out of place, her expression still carrying the remnants of adrenaline and confusion, her eyes searching for something she couldn't quite define. "You're fine," she said quietly. The words didn't land the way they used to. She moved to the window again. The ocean stretched out in the distance, dark and endless beneath the night sky. The city lights reflected faintly against its surface, steady and distant. Earlier, it had felt calming. Now, it felt like something watching back. Amara frowned slightly, folding her arms as she leaned against the glass. "That's enough," she muttered, pushing herself away. She wasn't doing this. Not tonight. She turned off the light and moved toward the bed, pulling the covers back as she sat down. Her body was tired, exhausted even. But her mind refused to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. That shape, that movement, that moment where everything stopped making sense. Amara lay back, staring at the ceiling as the seconds stretched into minutes. And somewhere between trying to rationalize it and trying to ignore it, a single thought settled in, quiet but unshakable. Whatever she had seen tonight was real, and whether she understood it or not, it had already pulled her in. Sleep didn't come easily. Amara drifted in and out of it, never settling long enough for it to feel real. Every time she started to sink, something pulled her back. A sound, a shift, a thought that refused to let go. At some point, she gave up trying. The room was dark except for the faint blue glow slipping through the window. The city still alive outside in ways she couldn't quite tune out. She lay on her side, staring at the wall, her body still while her mind moved in restless circles. It didn't make sense. That was the problem. If it had been a normal situation, a wrong turn, a stranger, a close call, she could have explained it away, filed it under something familiar, something she understood. But this? There was nothing familiar about it. The way the air had changed, the way that thing had moved, the way the man had reacted. Amara closed her eyes briefly, pressing her face into the pillow before rolling onto her back again with a quiet exhale. "Okay," she murmured, more to break the silence than anything else. "You're not doing this." She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat up, running a hand through her hair as she tried to shake off the lingering tension. Maybe she just needed water, or something to ground herself. Anything that reminded her she was still in control. The floor was cool beneath her feet as she crossed the room, the soft glow from the window guiding her just enough to avoid turning on the light. She reached for the small bottle of water on her desk, twisting the cap off and taking a slow sip. Quiet stretched again. Different now. More noticeable. Amara stilled, the bottle still in her hand as she listened. There it was. A sound. Soft. Barely there. Like something brushing against the outside of her door. Her chest tightened. She turned her head slowly toward it. Nothing moved. No shadow under the door. No footsteps in the hallway. Just silence. Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, shaking her head slightly. "You're tired," she whispered. That had to be it. Her nerves were shot, her mind overactive, her body still coming down from everything that had happened earlier. Of course things were going to feel exaggerated. Of course she was going to imagine things. She set the water bottle down and turned away, taking a step back toward the bed. The sound came again. Clearer this time. A faint shift. A subtle scrape. Right outside her door. Amara froze. Her pulse picked up, steady and sharp as her attention locked onto the handle. Still. Unmoving. But something was there. She knew it. Not because she heard it again. Because she felt it. That same pressure from earlier. Weaker now. But familiar. Her breath slowed as she stood there, every instinct telling her to stay exactly where she was. Don't move. Don't make noise. Just wait. The seconds stretched. 5, 10, 15. And then, nothing. Pressure eased. The air shifted back. Whatever had been there was gone. Amara let out a slow breath, her shoulders dropping slightly as she forced herself to move again. "You're fine," she said, quieter now. But she didn't sound convinced. She walked toward the door, her steps careful, measured, like she was testing the space with each one. Her hand hovered near the handle. Paused. Then slowly. She turned it. The door opened with a soft click. The hallway beyond was empty. Lights dim. Silent. Exactly the way it should be. Amara leaned slightly into the doorway, her eyes scanning the space. Left. Right. Nothing. No one. No sign that anything had been there at all. Her grip tightened slightly on the edge of the door. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though the words felt thinner now. She stepped back inside and closed the door, sliding the lock into place this time with a quiet, deliberate motion. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically, but in a way she couldn't quite explain. Like the walls had shifted just enough to remind her that being inside didn't necessarily mean being safe. Amara moved back to the window without thinking, her gaze drawn to the city below. Lights stretched out in every direction, steady and constant. Normal. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, faint but clear enough. She studied it for a moment. Then something caught her attention. Movement. Across the street. Amara's eyes narrowed slightly as she focused. A car sat parked along the curb. Black. Still. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had. She couldn't be sure. The longer she looked, the harder it became to tell. Her chest tightened slightly. That's normal, she said under her breath. It's just a car. People parked on streets. People came and went. Nothing about that was unusual. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling. Like it wasn't just parked there. Like it was waiting. Watching. Amara stepped back from the window, breaking her line of sight with it. No, she said more firmly this time. We're not doing this. She turned away, pulling the curtains halfway closed. Not enough to block the view completely, but enough to create distance. Space. Control. When she finally climbed back into bed, she didn't turn off the lamp this time. The soft light filled the room, pushing back the shadows just enough to make it easier to breathe. Her body slowly began to relax, the tension easing in small increments as exhaustion finally started to take over. But even as her eyes grew heavier, that feeling lingered. Faint, unsettling, like something had come close enough to touch her world, and decided not to. Not yet. Amara didn't remember falling asleep. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, pulling her under just long enough to quiet everything that had been running through her mind. When she opened her eyes again, the room was dim with early morning light, the city just beginning to wake beyond her window. For a moment she lay still, listening. Nothing. No sounds outside her door. No strange shifts in the air. Just the low hum of the building coming back to life. She exhaled slowly and sat up, pressing a hand briefly to her temple as she tried to shake off the remnants of the night before. It already felt distant. Not gone. Just harder to hold on to. Like a dream that didn't quite make sense the longer you stayed awake. Amara glanced toward her wrist. The faint bruise was still there. Subtle, but real. Her fingers brushed over it lightly before she stood, pushing herself into motion. She didn't want to sit in it. Didn't want to spend the morning replaying something she couldn't explain. Routine. That's what she needed. Something normal. By the time she stepped outside, the air had shifted again. Morning in Busan felt lighter, brighter, the tension from the night before fading beneath sunlight and movement. Students moved along the sidewalks, conversations picking up, the rhythm of the city settling into something easier to follow. It helped. A little. Amara adjusted her bag on her shoulder as she made her way down the street, letting herself focus on small things. The sound of footsteps, the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe, the familiar structure of people moving through their day. Normal. That's what this was. And she was fine. She didn't notice him at first. Not consciously. It started as a feeling. Faint. Subtle. The same way it had the night before. Something just slightly out of place. Amara slowed, her attention shifting without her fully realizing why. Then she saw him. Standing across the street. Still. Not waiting. Not lingering. Just there. He wasn't dressed in anything that stood out. Dark clothing, clean lines. Nothing out of place in a city like this. But there was something about him that didn't blend. Something in the way he held himself. Like everything around him moved. And he didn't need to. Amara's steps slowed further. Her gaze locked without permission. He was looking at her. Not casually. Not in passing. Directly. Like he had been before she even noticed him. A strange tension settled in her chest. She should have looked away. Kept walking. Ignored it. Instead, she stopped. Just for a second. Long enough for the moment to stretch. Then he moved. Not toward her. Not right away. He stepped off the curb, crossing the street with an ease that felt deliberate. Like he had already decided this interaction was going to happen. Amara's pulse picked up. Her instincts kicked in again, sharp, immediate. Leave. But her feet didn't move. Not yet. He stopped a few feet in front of her. Close enough that she could see him clearly now. His expression was calm, composed. Not a hint of urgency or concern. Just focus. You shouldn't have been there. The words were quiet, measured, but they landed harder than they should have. Amara blinked, caught off guard by the lack of introduction. "No good morning," she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. His gaze didn't shift, didn't react. "I asked you a question." "You weren't supposed to be there," he repeated, like the conversation hadn't changed at all. Something in her tightened. That tone, that control. It hit too close to something she'd already walked away from. "I didn't realize I needed permission to walk down a street," she said, folding her arms slightly. For a second, nothing changed. Then, something in his expression shifted. Not softer, not harder, just more focused. "Some places aren't meant for you," he said. Amara let out a quiet breath, more irritated now than anything else. "And you're the one who decides that?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, without doubt, like it wasn't even a question worth asking. Amara stared at him. That should have annoyed her more than it did. Instead, it unsettled her, because he believed it, completely. "Who are you?" she asked. A simple question, one that should have had a simple answer. But he didn't give one. Not right away. His gaze moved over her briefly, not in a way that felt inappropriate. Just assessing, like he was taking in details she hadn't offered. Then his attention returned to her face. "You're not hurt." It wasn't a question. Amara frowned slightly. "Should I be?" Pause. Brief. Controlled. Then, "No." Something about that didn't sit right. Not the word. The way he said it. Like it could have been different. Like it almost was. Amara shifted her weight slightly, her awareness sharpening again. "You were there," she said slowly. "Last night." Another pause. This one longer. He didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it. But the silence said enough. "What was that?" she pressed. His gaze held hers for a moment. Then drifted, just slightly. Not away. Past her. Like he was checking something she couldn't see. "Nothing you need to involve yourself in." There it was again. That line. Drawn without explanation. Amara's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I'm getting a little tired of hearing that," she said. "You don't get to decide what I..." "Amara." Her name stopped her. Mid-sentence. Mid-thought. Her chest tightened instantly. She hadn't told him that. Not once. "How do you stay where you belong?" The words cut clean through her question. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just final. Like a decision had been made. For her. Something in her snapped into place. Not fear. Not confusion. Something sharper. More familiar. "You don't know me," she said, her voice steady now. "So don't talk to me like you do." For the first time, there was a reaction. Subtle. But there. A flicker of something in his eyes. Interest. Not challenge. Not irritation. Something else. "You're right," he said. The agreement caught her off guard. "But I know enough." That didn't help. At all. Amara shook her head slightly, stepping back just enough to create space. "Okay, you know what? This has been weird," she said. "So I'm going to go to class now." He didn't stop her. Didn't move. Didn't follow. But she could feel it. That presence. Holding. Watching. Even as she turned and walked away. She didn't look back. Didn't slow down. But her mind stayed exactly where she'd left him. On the way he spoke. On the way he looked at her. On the fact that he knew her name. And as much as she wanted to write it off, to push it into the same category as everything else she didn't understand, she couldn't. Because this time, it wasn't just something she saw. It was someone. And something about him made it very clear. He wasn't going to stay in the background. By the time Amara reached campus, the morning had fully settled into its rhythm. Students moved with purpose now, conversations blending into the background as people filtered between buildings, coffee cups in hand, backpacks slung over shoulders. It should have felt routine, familiar even, but something in her chest hadn't quite caught up. Her steps slowed slightly as she approached the building, her mind still replaying the encounter from earlier. The way he had spoken, the way he had looked at her, and more than anything, the way he had known her name. Amara tightened her grip on the strap of her bag and pushed the thought aside as she stepped inside. The shift from outside to the controlled environment of the building was immediate. Fluorescent lighting, quiet conversation, the faint echo of footsteps against polished floors. It grounded her just enough to keep moving. She made her way into the classroom a few minutes early and took her seat, setting her bag down beside her. Around her, students settled in, flipping through notebooks, scrolling on their phones, carrying on small conversations that felt distant even from a few feet away. Amara tried to focus on that. On normal. But her attention drifted. Her pen hovered over the page without moving, her thoughts circling back to the same place no matter how many times she redirected them. You look like you didn't sleep. Amara glanced up. Raylan slid into the seat beside her, setting her coffee down with a knowing look. I slept, Amara said. Liar, Raylan replied easily. You've got that look. What look? There's something happened and you're not telling me look. Amara huffed a quiet breath, shaking her head as she opened her notebook. Nothing happened. Raylan raised a brow, but didn't push immediately. Hum. Before she could respond, the room shifted. It wasn't loud. No one announced it. But the energy changed the moment Professor Men Ji-hoon walked in. Conversations quieted almost instinctively as he moved to the front of the room, setting his bag down with the same calm precision as the day before. He didn't rush, didn't need to call for attention. He simply waited, and the room followed. Good morning, he said, his voice steady. A few students responded. He nodded once, then turned to the board, writing out a short phrase before stepping back. Perception versus reality. Amara's gaze lingered on the words. Her stomach tightened slightly. This concept, Men Ji-hoon began, turning to face the class, is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human behavior. He moved slowly as he spoke, his presence measured. Deliberate. What you believe you see is shaped by experience, culture, bias, expectation. His gaze moved across the room, not lingering, but not missing anything either. Problem is, those things are not always accurate. Amara shifted slightly in her seat, her attention sharpening despite herself. You assume something is one thing, he continued, because that is what makes sense to you. His gaze passed over her. Just briefly. But enough. And you stop looking deeper. Something about the way he said it made her sit a little straighter. Not because he had singled her out, but because it felt pointed. You see someone standing in a place they shouldn't be, he went on, and you interpret that based on your understanding of the world. Amara's pen stilled. Her chest tightened. You don't ask why they're there, he added. You decide what it means. The room stayed quiet, focused. But for Amara, the words hit differently. Too close. Like they were brushing up against something she hadn't said out loud. Now, Men Ji-hoon said, shifting slightly as he leaned against the desk. What happens when your perception is wrong? A student near the front raised their hand, offering an answer. Amara didn't hear it. Her attention had shifted again. That feeling. Faint, but familiar. Her gaze moved toward the window without thinking. Outside, the campus stretched out under clear daylight. Students crossed the street. Cars passed at regular intervals. Everything exactly as it should be. But her focus narrowed. There, across the street, a black car, parked. Still. Her breath slowed slightly as she stared at it. It could have been anyone's. It probably was. But something about it felt. Amara. Her head lifted instantly. Men Ji-hoon stood at the front of the room, his attention fixed on her now. Yes. You've been quiet today, he said. Not accusing. Just observant. What do you think? Question pulled her back into the room, into the space she was physically in instead of the one her mind had drifted toward. Amara straightened slightly, forcing herself to refocus. I think perception can be limited, she said carefully. People assume they understand something based on what they're used to, even if it doesn't fully fit. Men Ji-hoon nodded once. And what happens when it doesn't fit? Amara hesitated. Her mind flickered back, just briefly, to the alley, to the movement, to something she still couldn't explain. They ignore it, she said. Or try to. A faint shift in his expression. Subtle, but there. Exactly, he said. He let the moment sit for a second before continuing the lecture, but Amara felt it. That brief pause. That recognition. Like he had heard more in her answer than what she actually said. Class moved on, but her focus didn't fully return. She took notes when she needed to, responded when called on, but part of her stayed just outside of it. Watching. Listening. Trying to make sense of something she couldn't quite reach. By the time the lecture ended, she felt it again. That same awareness. Subtle. Persistent. She packed her things slowly, her movements deliberate as students began filing out of the room. Raylan nudged her lightly. You're definitely not okay. Amara exhaled, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I'm fine. You keep saying that. I mean it. Raylan gave her a look but didn't argue, falling into step beside her as they moved toward the door. As they stepped into the hallway, the noise picked up again, voices overlapping, movement constant. Normal. But it didn't settle her. Not completely. Amara's gaze shifted, just briefly, toward the windows at the end of the hall. The street beyond was visible from here. Clear. Open. The black car was gone. She frowned slightly, her steps slowing for just a fraction of a second before she forced herself forward again. It didn't matter. It was probably nothing. It had to be. And yet, as she walked away, that same quiet certainty lingered in the back of her mind. Whatever she thought she understood about what was happening wasn't enough. The hallway felt louder than it should have. Amara noticed it as she walked beside Raylan, the noise of students filling the space in a way that should have been grounding. Conversations overlapped, footsteps echoed, and doors opened and closed in a steady rhythm that made everything feel structured and predictable. It should have helped. It didn't. Her attention drifted again, never fully settling on anything in front of her. She answered Raylan when she spoke, nodded when it made sense, but her thoughts kept circling back to the same place. Back to the alley, to the man who had grabbed her, and to the one she had seen that morning. You're doing it again, Raylan said, glancing at her. Doing what? That thing where you're here, but not really here. Amara let out a quiet breath. I'm listening. Barely, Raylan replied. You've said, yeah, 3 times in the last minute, and I don't think you heard a word. Amara shook her head slightly, trying to pull herself back into the moment. I'm just tired. Raylan studied her for a second, clearly unconvinced, but she didn't push. All right, she said, though her tone suggested she'd come back to it later. They turned into a quieter corridor, one that led toward the side exit of the building. The shift was immediate. Fewer people passed through here, and the noise dropped just enough to make every sound feel more distinct. Amara exhaled slowly, her shoulders loosening a fraction. I'm fine, she said again, softer this time. Raylan didn't respond. She didn't need to. Amara already knew she wasn't buying it. They had only taken a few more steps when something in Amara's awareness sharpened. It wasn't a sound. Not exactly. More like a shift in the space ahead of her. She slowed without meaning to, her gaze lifting toward the far end of the hallway. Someone stood there. Tall. Still. Positioned just off to the side like he had been there long enough to belong. Amara's chest tightened. Raylan noticed the change in her pace and followed her line of sight. What is it? Amara didn't answer. The man pushed off the wall and started walking toward them. He didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. Each step felt deliberate, measured in a way that made it clear he wasn't reacting to anything around him. He was moving because he had already decided to. And as he got closer, the air seemed to shift. Subtle, but unmistakable. Amara felt it immediately. That same pressure from the night before. Stronger now. Closer. Raylan leaned in slightly. Do you know him? Amara shook her head, her gaze fixed. No. But something in her said she should. The man stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice. His expression was calm, but there was nothing casual about him. The way he held himself, the way his attention locked onto her. It all felt intentional. You were in the alley last night. It wasn't phrased as a question. Amara's pulse jumped. Raylan looked between them, her confusion clear. Okay, what? It was a mistake, he continued, his attention never leaving Amara. Her jaw tightened slightly. I already heard that. Something flickered in his gaze. Not quite amusement, but not neutral either. You shouldn't have seen that, he said. Amara folded her arms, grounding herself in the movement. I didn't exactly plan it. That doesn't change anything. His tone was different from Changho's. Less controlled. There was an edge to it that made her shoulders tense instinctively. Raylan stepped forward slightly. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but... You weren't involved, he said, cutting her off without raising his voice. Stay out of it. Raylan blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? Amara stepped forward before the moment could escalate. Don't talk to her like that. His attention shifted back to her immediately. Focused. Direct. You don't understand what you stepped into, he said. Then explain it, Amara shot back. A brief pause followed, as if he were considering whether that was even an option. Then he shook his head once. No. The answer came easily. Final. Amara let out a slow breath, frustration settling in. So what? You're just going to keep showing up, telling me I shouldn't have been somewhere, and not actually say anything useful. His gaze held hers. Yes. The simplicity of it should have shut the conversation down. Instead, it made something in her push back harder. Because she was tired of it, of being told where she should and shouldn't be, of being kept just outside of something without explanation. That's not going to work for me, she said, her voice steady. He stepped closer. Not enough to invade her space, but enough to shift the balance between them. You're already in it, he said. The words landed differently this time. Not like a warning, like a fact. Amara's breath caught slightly. What does that even mean? For a moment, he didn't answer. His attention moved past her briefly, scanning the hallway behind her before returning. When he spoke again, his tone had changed just slightly. You need to be careful, he said. Amara frowned. About what? He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped back, creating distance again as if the conversation had already run its course. Stay on campus, he added. At least for now. That's not an explanation, she said. It's the only one you're getting. And with that, he turned and walked away. No hesitation. No pause. No second glance. Raylan watched him go, then turned back to Amara, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. Okay, she said slowly. You want to tell me what that was? Amara didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed on the space he had just left, her thoughts catching on the one thing that refused to settle. You're already in it. Her chest tightened slightly, because whatever that meant, it didn't feel like something she could walk away from. Raylan didn't move right away. She stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching the direction the man had gone as if she expected him to come back. Okay, she said finally, turning to Amara. You're telling me everything. Now. Amara exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through her hair as she tried to decide where to even start. I don't have everything to tell, she said. That's kind of the problem. Raylan stared at her. You've got random men approaching you about alleys and telling me to stay out of things I don't even understand. That's not nothing. I know. Then start somewhere. Amara hesitated. She could tell her about the alley, about getting grabbed, about running. But the rest of it, the part that didn't make sense, the part that felt just out of reach, wouldn't land the way it should. It would sound exaggerated. Or worse, imagined. I took a wrong turn last night, she said carefully. Ended up somewhere I shouldn't have been. That's it. Raylan didn't look convinced. And nothing. I left. And somehow that turns into this. Amara shook her head. I don't know how it turned into this. Raylan crossed her arms, clearly debating whether to push harder. She didn't get the chance. Because the air shifted again. Amara felt it first. A subtle change, but familiar now in a way that made her attention snap forward before she could think it through. Raylan noticed the change in her expression. What? Amara didn't answer. Her gaze moved toward the entrance at the end of the corridor. And then, he stepped inside. Changho. He didn't rush. Didn't look around. He simply walked in, his presence settling into the space in a way that felt immediate and contained all at once. People moved around him like normal. No one stopped. No one stared. And yet, to Amara, it felt like the entire room had shifted to make space for him. Raylan followed her line of sight and went quiet. That's the other one, isn't it? Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Changho's attention had already found her. It wasn't searching. It wasn't curious. It was direct, like he had expected her to be exactly where she was. He crossed the distance between them without hesitation. Amara felt it with each step. Not fear. Not exactly. Something heavier. More controlled. He stopped in front of her, his expression unchanged, his gaze steady. You spoke to him. Again, not a question. Amara held his gaze this time, refusing to give ground. He approached me. That wasn't the point. Her jaw tightened. Then maybe say what you actually mean. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been acknowledgement, or interest, or simply recognition that she wasn't going to respond the way he expected. You're not staying out of this, he said. It was a statement. Clear. Certain. Amara exhaled slowly. No one has explained what this is, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be staying out of. That doesn't change the expectation. There it was again. That calm certainty. Like the conversation had already been decided. Amara felt the irritation rise, sharper now because of how familiar it felt. I don't follow rules I don't understand, she said. Changho studied her for a moment, his attention focused in a way that felt deliberate rather than invasive. You will, he replied. Confidence in it should have annoyed her more than it did. Instead, it unsettled her, because it didn't sound like a challenge. It sounded like a fact. Amara shook her head slightly. You don't get to decide that. For the first time, he didn't respond immediately. His attention shifted past her, toward the hallway behind her. The direction Han had gone. The change was subtle, but Amara noticed it. The way his focus sharpened. The way his posture adjusted just slightly. When his gaze returned to her, something had settled. Not emotion. Decision. You've already been seen, he said. That changes your position. Amara frowned. Seen by who? That's not information you need. Frustration flickered again. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make sense. It does. Not to me. Their words held between them, the space tightening just enough to make it clear neither of them was stepping away first. Raylan shifted beside her, clearly aware she was standing in the middle of something she didn't understand. Amara, she said quietly. Changho's gaze moved to her briefly. Not dismissive, not hostile, but firm enough to make it clear she wasn't part of the conversation. When his attention returned to Amara, it was sharper. You need to stay where you're supposed to be, he said. Amara let out a breath, her patience thinning. You keep saying that like you know me. I know enough. That again. Amara felt it this time. Not just irritation, but something else layered beneath it. Something that made her want to push back instead of step away. Then you don't know as much as you think, she said. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, a voice cut in from behind. She's not the problem. The shift was immediate. Amara turned. Han stood a few feet away, his attention fixed on Changho now. The edge from earlier was still there, but it had changed. Less directed at her, more focused on the man in front of her. Changho didn't turn right away. He didn't need to. You shouldn't have approached her, he said, his tone even. Han didn't back down. She was already involved. That doesn't give you authority. The words were quiet, but they carried. Amara felt the difference immediately. This wasn't the same conversation. The air tightened, not with confusion this time, but with something structured, defined. Han held his ground for a second, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled slightly, his gaze flicking briefly to Amara before returning to Changho. She saw enough, he said. You know that. Pause. Not long, but enough. I'll handle it, Changho replied. There was no argument in his tone, no raised voice. Just a statement that didn't leave room for negotiation. Han's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't push further. Instead, he gave a short nod. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Then he stepped back. Not retreating. Just removing himself from the center of it. Amara watched the exchange, her attention sharpening as pieces started to fall into place. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. There was structure here. Hierarchy. Rules she wasn't being told. And somehow, she had stepped directly into it. Changho turned back to her. The shift was immediate. Whatever had passed between them, and Han was gone from his expression, replaced with that same calm focus. You need to listen carefully, he said. Amara didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't the same conversation as before. Stay where you're supposed to be, he continued. Do not go looking for anything you don't understand. Amara held his gaze. And if I do? A brief pause. Then, you won't like what finds you first. The words settled between them, quiet but heavy. Not a threat. A warning. Amara felt it. That distinction. And somehow that made it worse. Changho didn't wait for a response. He stepped past her, his presence fading just as quickly as it had settled. Han followed a moment later, his gaze lingering briefly before he turned away as well. And just like that, they were gone. Raylan let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. Okay, I take it back. You're definitely not fine. Amara didn't respond. Her attention stayed on the space they had just left behind, her thoughts moving faster now, trying to catch up to something that was finally starting to take shape. Because whatever this was, it wasn't random, and it wasn't small. By the time Amara got back to her room, the day felt longer than it should have. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that came from doing too much. It sat differently, like her mind had been working overtime trying to keep up with something it didn't fully understand. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet settle around her. The room looked the same as it had that morning. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. And yet, it didn't feel untouched. Amara pushed off the door and crossed the room slowly, setting her bag down on the chair before moving toward the window. The city stretched out beyond the glass, the late afternoon light beginning to fade into something softer. People moved through the streets below, cars passing in steady lines. Everything continuing exactly as it should. Normal. She rested her hand lightly against the glass, her gaze drifting without focusing on anything in particular. For a while she just stood there, letting the silence do its job, trying to separate what she knew from what she thought she knew. The problem was, there wasn't much she could actually explain. Two men, both connected, both aware of her in a way that didn't make sense, and neither of them willing to tell her why. Amara exhaled slowly and stepped back from the window, turning toward the mirror without thinking. Her reflection stared back at her, unchanged on the surface. The same face, the same posture, the same person she had been before all of this started. But it didn't feel the same. She moved closer, her gaze dropping to her wrist again. The bruise had darkened slightly. A small thing, easy to ignore if she wanted to. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because it was proof. Whatever had happened the night before, it wasn't something she imagined. And whatever she had stepped into today was connected to it. Amara let her hand fall back to her side, her thoughts settling into something steadier now. Not clearer, but more defined. She didn't know what this was. Didn't know who they were. Didn't know what they meant when they talked about territory, or being seen, or staying where she was supposed to be. But she knew one thing. This wasn't going to stop. Not because she ignored it. Not because she stayed on campus. Not because she followed instructions she didn't understand. Something about the way they spoke, especially him, made that clear. Changho wasn't guessing. He wasn't reacting. He already knew how this would unfold. And somehow, that bothered her more than anything else. Amara turned away from the mirror and sat down on the edge of the bed, her fingers lacing together as she leaned forward slightly. For a brief moment, she considered doing exactly what he said. Staying where she belonged. Keeping her distance. Letting whatever this was pass her by. It would be easier. Safer. And for most people, that would be enough. But the thought didn't sit right. Not after everything. Not after the way this had started. And definitely not after the way he looked at her, like the outcome had already been decided. Amara leaned back slowly, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling as a quiet determination settled in. If I'm already in it, she murmured, her voice low but steady, then I might as well know what it is. The words didn't feel reckless. They felt inevitable. The light outside dimmed gradually as evening settled in, the city shifting once again beneath the changing sky. Inside the room, everything remained still, calm, unchanged. But beneath that, something had already shifted. Not around her, within her, and whether she was ready for it or not. She had stopped standing on the outside of whatever this was. She had taken a step forward.